Hi, I'm Lou, and in this video I'm going to share some key information about how to keep safe whilst you're foraging, as well as how to keep within the legal framework of the UK. So I personally really enjoy foraging. There's something about going out into nature and harvesting wild plants to be able to eat or cook up for your dinner that is really empowering, and I also believe it really deepens the connection we have with those individual species. Suddenly it's not just a world of green out there, you've got a reason for recognising the different species around you. Also, there's a nutritional benefit for eating wild plants. Apparently, anthropologists say that our hunter-gatherer ancestors would eat between 200 and 1,000 different plant species throughout a year, obviously in different amounts and at different times of year. Compare that to our modern day diets, and most supermarkets only sell about 20 plant species. So if you imagine the different cocktail of chemicals our hunter-gatherer ancestors had to keep their bodies healthy compared to our modern day diet. So there's also those nutritional benefits to eating wild plants. However, it is an activity that if you're doing either just for yourself, or if you are doing it with forest school groups of children or young people, that you really need to be aware of the potential risks involved. At forest school, it's one of the most high-risk activities on my risk-benefit analysis, because as soon as you introduce the idea to a child, a young person, or even an adult that you can pick something growing in nature and eat it, you've suddenly dramatically increased the chance that they might accidentally poison themselves. Even blackberry picking, which we might not even think about as foraging because it's so ingrained in our culture and what we would do each autumn, is still technically foraging. And I've actually heard stories of young children, early years children, mistaking deadly nightshade berries for blackberries and sticking them in their mouths, and they wouldn't have done that had they not have been blackberry picking with adults around them. So we need to be really careful about how we go about it. Within the UK, poisonings from wild plants are relatively low. However, the majority of cases come from people purposefully picking the plants and consuming them, not just randomly accidentally eating them. So it's through identification or misidentification that most of the poisonings occur. So for example, I've got 2 leaves here for you. One of them is edible, one of them is pretty seriously poisonous. Are your ID skills up to the challenge of gambling which is which before you eat something? Something to really think about. So I'm going to just talk through a few key tips about how to keep safe when you're out foraging, either yourself or with groups, and also a little bit about the legalities to keep within the legal frameworks of the UK. So before you undertake any foraging activities at forest school, I would strongly recommend that you do a thorough risk-benefit analysis of that activity, taking into account the age and level of understanding of the learners that you're working with. I'm now going to give you 7 safety tips that could be used as control actions in your risk assessment, but do remember to tailor it to the learners in your group. 1, only pick plants that you're sure that the person with the lowest level of understanding in the group will be able to recognise and not easily confused with poisonous species. Said the green woodpecker. 1, only pick species that you're certain all of the learners in the group will be able to recognise and distinguish from any similar species. I would also strongly recommend only picking species that can't be easily confused with toxic ones. There are certain families of plants, such as the umbellifer family, the carrot family, that has some very tasty edibles in it, but also has some very deadly poisonous ones. So that's a family, for example, I would recommend keeping away from. 2, make sure that you're confident in your own identification skills before you try and share that knowledge with anybody else. I would strongly recommend the use of some comprehensive field guides so that you can double check and cross-reference. Use more than one source where possible. There is a saying, if in doubt, leave it out. So don't take the risk if you're not sure what something is. 3, be mindful of where you're collecting your samples from. avoid any overly polluted areas, such as from along roadside verges where you'll get heavy metals from exhaust fumes, or along field verges where the farmers might have been spraying chemicals and pesticides. And also, if you're living in more urban areas, think about where dog walkers might have gone and what's within range of the cocked leg. 4, when you're collecting, don't just grab handfuls of the species. Do look at very carefully what it is that you're collecting. There might be poisonous species growing up amongst the edible ones. 5, now particularly if you are working with groups, I personally have a control action where I ask the green woodpecker to join in. 5. Now, if you are doing this with groups, I would strongly recommend not just picking from the plant and eating it straight away, but have a control action in place where everyone brings everything back and lays it out. That gives you the opportunity to check what other people have collected and to sort it out very clearly. You could also wash the samples too if you wanted to be more hygienic. 6, if you suffer from any health complaints or are taking medication or are pregnant, do check with your GP or healthcare professional before you try any wild plants. Certain plants, as well as being edible, have medicinal properties, and some can even prevent certain medications from working or will interfere in some way. 7, finally, when you try something for the first time, I'd strongly recommend only eating a very small amount of it. Even with edible species, certain people might have higher sensitivities than others, and so you can't predict how individuals will react to certain new foods. Once you've tried a small amount, then you can slowly increase the amount once you're confident that you're not going to react badly to it. So as well as safety, we need to make sure that we're working within the law, and there are certain legal frameworks in the UK that we need to be aware of to make sure that we're not breaking them. So the first is the CROW Act, or the Countryside and Rights of Way Act, and that's the act that says whether we are allowed access to certain bits of land. So you need to have a legal right to be on the land before you collect anything. So for example, footpaths, bridle ways, restricted byways. Also certain land has what's called open access, where landowners have granted free access to people to wander off paths. Of course, if you know the landowner, you can also gain landowners' consent to be on private land as well. So if we have a legal right to be on the land, generally speaking, there are the 4 Fs that we can gather. So there is foliage, the leaves, flowers, there is fungi, and there is fruits. So those are the 4 Fs. So if you're legally allowed to be on the land, generally speaking, you can collect the 4 Fs without needing any additional permission. You'll notice that roots and tubers are not within the 4 Fs, and that's because under the Countryside and Wildlife Act, it's illegal to uproot any wild plant without landowners' permission. So technically, if you're out collecting something like burdock, which has got a nice starchy root, or even dandelions for their roots, you're meant to have landowner permission. Also, under the Countryside and Wildlife Act, there are certain rare species that are afforded additional protection, and it's illegal to harm these or pick these in any shape or form. There is a list of these in Schedule 8 of the Countryside and Wildlife Act. There are also special designations that might be put on the land, for example, SSSIs, or Sites of Special Scientific Interest, and they might have certain legal protection that means that any plant within that SSSI is not allowed to be picked as well. So if you're on nature reserves or areas that have got additional protection, it's worth checking what the legal rights are. Finally, we want to make sure that we're practicing sustainable harvesting and also sharing that kind of practice with the groups that we're working with. We wouldn't want to pick all the species that are growing in one area, because then there wouldn't be any left for the wildlife. So as a rough guideline, I would suggest only picking species that are growing abundantly in that area, and as a rough guide, don't take any more than 5% of the total cover, so that there's going to be plenty there for the wildlife. So I hope this has been useful and given you some more information about the safety and legalities of foraging. We'll pop down some links to sources of further information in the description bar below. I wonder, do you know which of these is the poisonous one and which one's the edible? Do you know what these plants are? Let me know in the comments below, or if you would like some help with that, do check out my foraging video. Bing! Maybe I should do the bing sound.
You should.
Let me know in the comments below if you do know which of these is poisonous and which of these is edible. If you need some help with this, then do check out my video, which I'll put a link up here for you, which will help you distinguish between the two. Foraging can be risky, but we also learn new things, taking steps to keep us safe. Who knows what the forest brings? Remember the 4 F's and enjoy those tasty leaves. Do remember, when times get tough, you can always head to the trees.
What was that?